Community. Welcome to the REPO Community Event Series. So the topic today is community open principles before, during, and after the global pandemic, and recognize that we're actually very much in the pandemic, but hopeful, thinking towards that future also. So I also wanted to point to some logistical things. So that agenda and sign up notes link is in our slide deck, and I think one of us can actually share that in the chat with everyone that's arriving. And so it's a sign up sheet. Feel free if you want to sign up, but we also have an attendance list through the webinar, and we're taking collaborative notes as well. So if you feel free to join us in that, and you'll find the agenda in there as well, and some other things like our links to the slide decks, which we'll add later, and then links to our Twitter profiles as well. So let me actually go into presentation mode. I just realized it wasn't in presentation mode. And also introduce myself. So I'm Christopher Erdman. I'm part of the REPO group, and we'll introduce other members of this group. In my day job, I'm also with the American Geophysical Union and the Data Leadership Group. So really, this idea for this webinar came up because we had a number of questions, as you can see here. What do we mean by open? As far as like communities, what do we mean? What are our definitions? Sometimes they're different between our communities, and how do we sort of approach, engage, and train members of our communities? That sometimes varies as well. And how do we sort of track and I guess assess how we're approaching open in these various communities, and also just how we're addressing sort of the norms, incentives, this recognition, and in sort of the overall global scene, and addressing inclusion as well, how members join our groups. And then the big question is if anything has shifted during this time, and to talk about that as well. And so we're very lucky to have 4 speakers with us today for different sort of community perspectives, different approaches, and it'll be great to hear from them about how they sort of designed, or how they developed and applied these approaches, and think about how they're sort of working during this time and thinking ahead as well. So I'll introduce our some of our team here. So you heard from me. There's Helen Claire from JISC, who is another moderator, and she'll be helping with the Q&A later on, and also the notes. Irina Kuchma, who I'm very thankful for hosting this webinar through EIFL. So she'll talk about EIFL soon here. And then Dan O'Donnell, sort of our lead on the REPO project, also a host, and he'll be talking about REPO. And Masa Miri, who helps us with a lot of things, who couldn't unfortunately be here, but she helps with coordination, and Fiona Murphy and Phil Jones as well. So I'll pass it on to, maybe I can still share, Arena, and you can present here.
Thanks a lot, Chris, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So EIFL is very happy to be this webinar co-host, and EIFL works with National Library Consortia in Africa, Asia, and Europe. And our mission is to enable access to knowledge for education, learning, and research. And of course, open science training is one of the major activities open access program, which I manage, is doing. And with that, we trying to enhance researcher students and other actors open science and open research skills, and we've just kicked off a project in Ethiopia with Addis Ababa University, and some more. We also have an open science training project in my country, in Ukraine, and we're also very fortunate to be part of EOSC Future project. And when we help to build open science skills, we also trying to embed open science skills and training in institutional and national open science and digital skills policies, because we consider it's really important to include open science skills in research incentives and structures. So looking forward to today's discussion.
Thanks, Serena. Next up is Dan, talk about REPO. Dan, you're on mute.
It wouldn't be a Zoom call if somebody wasn't.
I like the animated reaction though.
My name's Dan O'Donnell. I'm coming to you from the University of Lethbridge, whose Blackfoot name is Iniskeem, and we're on traditional Blackfoot territory in what is now the province of Alberta. REPO is a project funded by the Sloan Foundation that is looking, prompted by the COVID pandemic crisis, to look at how open science training has adapted to COVID in the last 18 months, and to look, more importantly, I think even proactively, to look at how the changes that were forced upon organizations are going to affect their future deliverables. We think it's about more than the mechanics of the system as we've done our work, and we're beginning to really see the degree to which community and culture is crucial here. And as it says on the slide, we're particularly interested in engaging with those, I should say, inside and outside the usual suspects. The hosts of REPO, the partners, are amongst the most prominent open science training organizations in the world. But we're also very interested in people who may not even see themselves as open science trainers, and yet are helping people adapt their research to the new open world. You can see at the bottom of the slide my email address and also a link to our home. It's currently a Force 11 working group, and we're anticipating that at the end of the period, it'll be a relatively lightweight community of practice in which people can share information about their work and ask for tips and ideas in a communal and supportive forum. Next slide, I suspect, and I'll talk about some of the things we're doing.
Oh, it's on next slide, I think.
Oh, is it? Sorry, it's not on mine. Okay, got it. Yeah, one of the things that we are doing is coordinating a number of webinars amongst different groups, partner groups and other groups. And you can see some of the ones that we know about coming up. The most close one to us is the one on July 8th. That's next week at 15:30 UTC, and it will be a community call, I believe, involving some of the panelists that are here, plus some additional ones on equity, diversity, inclusion, and open science. There's the FISCI, the Force 11 Scholarly Communications Institute, from July 26th to, I believe, August 1st. There's a URL there. I think registration is just about to close. On September 20th to the 23rd, there will be the open air organized Open Science Fair, fostering local and global open science communities. In September through December, we will be running a series at REPO, a series of, we're calling them fireside chats, but they do range from one-on-one conversations to panels like this, in fact. And they'll be running probably roughly bi-weekly from the week after the Open Science Fair, right through until the end of the year. And then finally, a related project, which doesn't really have a very strong name right now. It's going to be on November 8th to 11th. We're organizing a workshop on North-South open science training and organization across disciplines. And that's coming out of Santiago and funded by SSHRC. And those are some of the ones we know, but as I'm sure you're all aware, there's an awful lot of open science training and webinars going on around the world. In fact, if you have something that you would like to have us discuss at any of these other events, we have somebody dedicated to promoting open science webinars, Masa, who was mentioned but isn't able to be here today. And so if you pass on information about your webinars to us, we can help promote it, help find panelists, do things like that. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Dan. So next up are our speakers. Dr. Ana Persic from UNESCO, Dr. Arianna. I should have asked about your pronunciations here, but maybe you can pronounce your name better, Arianna, and Johanna Havemann from Open Science MOOC, and Osman Aldirdiri from AfricArXiv. And one other thing, I think a lot of you have found the chat and the Q&A, but please, during the time that our speakers are speaking, then please ask your questions, and we're monitoring that and our speakers as well, also the chat. So I will pass it over to Ana first. So I'll stop sharing and.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. I hope you can all hear me well. Thanks again for the invitation. Very happy to be able to present here some of our work on open science from UNESCO. So my name is Ana Persic. I work in the UNESCO headquarters in Paris in the section for science policy and partnerships. And I was very fortunate, I guess, because I have been for the past 2 years almost involved in the development of a UNESCO recommendation on open science. Knowing that a UNESCO recommendation is a legal instrument, a global legal instrument that sets the norms around a certain topic. And in this case, it is around the topic of open science. So thanks again for the invitation. Great subject for discussion and the perfect moment. And I'm happy to share some of my slides with you as well. So let me just share my screen. Up. Here we go. I think it should be okay right now. So I'm maybe going to start from the last question, and that is, what are the lessons that we've learned from this COVID pandemic? The way we see it and what we've heard from our different member states. So just for those who don't know, I believe everybody does, but just in case, UNESCO is the agency of the United Nations that deals with education, science, and culture. Hence the importance that UNESCO does to anything that is happening in science, and in particular to this new movement of relatively new movement of open science. And as I was saying, I think some of the key lessons learned from the COVID pandemic is that we've seen how important it is to have timely and free access, or available access, let's say, to scientific data, publication, and information. How important the scientific collaborations are at all different levels, and how important it is to share information at all different levels, and most importantly, between the developed and developing countries. We've also seen, we knew it before, but it kind of demonstrated to all the different stakeholders and actors in society that the Science Policy Society dialogue is extremely important to respond to certain challenges, whether it's short-term or long-term challenges, whether it's natural human-made disasters or pandemics like the one that we are just still facing globally. And also we've seen how important it is to fulfill this human right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress. So there is in the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights, there is the human right to enjoy the benefits of scientific progress, and it is extremely important to fulfill this human right globally. And it really is for the benefit of all. So in short, the key lesson probably from the COVID-19 pandemic that was extremely important for UNESCO is that there is need for open science. There is need for science to be more accessible, more open, more transparent, more democratic in a way, that there are different actors who are participating. And I think it really reinforced the movement of open science globally. From the UNESCO perspective, even before the pandemics, we had several initiatives on open science. And actually, this whole idea of a recommendation for open science started in November 2019. So just a little bit before the whole pandemic starts. So it was already in the air. Because our member states and the different networks that we have, particularly the networks of scientists, really do see open science as a possible game changer to bridge the divides between developed and developing countries, in science, technology, and innovation, and not just between the different countries, also within the different countries. And that also there is a big potential of open science as a tool to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and also to fulfill the human right to science, as I was saying before. So in this context, and knowing that open science as a movement has already been around for some time, at this UNESCO General Conference, that's where all the member states come together, 193 of them. So in November 2019, at the 40th General Conference, the UNESCO General Conference of the member states tasked the organization, the Secretariat, to develop an international standard-setting instrument on open science in a form of a UNESCO recommendation on open science. So it's not a legally binding instrument, but it is a global legal instrument that is supposed to influence the legislations, laws, and norms in different countries. Countries who adopt recommendations then also have the commitment to implement them and have to report back to UNESCO as to the progress of the implementation. So it's a pretty serious, I would say, global legal instrument and the standard setter for a specific theme. And we are very happy that our member states recognize the importance of open science and recognize the need for such a global standard setting instrument. So since November 2019 until now, and going to November 2021, so this year, we've had a series of different steps, let's say, in the process of the development of the recommendation. And I think the most important part was to try to understand who are the different communities that need to come together and discuss about open science. Who are the actors that have to provide us with their inputs into the draft recommendation? The instructions we had from member states was really to be as inclusive as possible, as attentive as possible to different needs, particularly to the needs and concerns from scientists and other open science actors from developing countries. So we really, throughout the last year and a half, held a number of different consultations and meetings with different stakeholders from different regions, including a global survey and then a series of regional meetings, to gather these inputs and to understand what is the understanding of open science globally. What are the key concerns? What is the key definition that is coming out of it? What are the key principles and values of open science that resonate to different communities in different parts of the world? We also set up an Open Science Advisory Committee, and Irina Kuchma is part of that. So thank you very much for your engagement in the advisory committee. Again, with members from different disciplines, from different parts of the world. It's a 30-member advisory committee. And they were very, very important in the sense that they were also guiding us throughout the process and being attentive to the concerns from their respective regions. We've established an open science partnership. It's still open, so whoever is interested can be part of it. And we're hoping that this partnership will have a critical role to play when it comes to the implementation of the draft recommendation in different countries. So through these different consultations, we came up with the first draft in September 2020. That draft text was sent to member states for comments and to the partners for comments. Then we integrated the comments, produced a second draft, which was shared in March. And then in May this year, what happened is that the experts nominated by governments from some 100 countries came together to discuss this draft and to agree on a text that can then be forwarded to the General Conference. So that's when all the member states are meeting in November for final adoption. So some of you were actually part of these negotiations, intergovernmental negotiations. It was a very, very interesting process, which showed how much interest there is both from governments and from other actors to come together and to really build a joint vision of what the open science is, how it should look like, what does it mean, what are the principles, and what are the actions to be taken. So we're very happy that that meeting actually agreed on a text And that text is now going to the General Conference for the final adoption. So there are several parts in the recommendation, and I do encourage you to go to our website and see the latest version of the text. And I think what is really important for us is the fact that we now finally have a definition of open science that is kind of compatible with how people see it and how different communities see them around the world. So not just from one perspective of one region, but from different regions. And so it is defined now as an inclusive construct, which combines different movements and practices that aim to make the scientific knowledge openly available, accessible, and reusable, to increase scientific collaboration and sharing of information, and also to open the process of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation, and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. Another important part in the recommendation is now the agreement of what are the different key elements or key pillars of open science, going thus beyond open access and including also some other elements. So we do have, of course, the open scientific knowledge, which refers to the open access to scientific publications, research data, metadata, open educational resources, software, source code, and hardware. And in the recommendation, all of these are kind of defined. Open science infrastructures, which bring together both digital and physical infrastructures, which are critical for open science. And very interestingly, during the intergovernmental negotiations, that is the part that was negotiated the most in a way, because a lot of different stakeholders and countries wanted to make sure that we got the infrastructures right, because they find that the open science infrastructures really are the basis for the rest of open science. Then open engagement with societal actors, together with practices like, citizen science, crowdsourcing, voluntary science, etc. And an open dialogue with other knowledge systems, mainly indigenous knowledge systems. And we had wonderful conversations and consultations with indigenous knowledge holders to define a little bit more this interface between open science and traditional or indigenous knowledge, and how the two should best interact. So really, in terms of a definition, it's a broad definition that brings together kind of opening of the scientific inputs and outputs for the scientific community, but also goes beyond that and opens it up to society. In terms of the different core values that have been defined now in the recommendation, we have quality and integrity, collective benefit, equity and fairness, and diversity and inclusiveness as the core values for open science. And again, I think it's nice that all of these are also described so that we know what we are talking about when we mention collective benefit or equity and fairness, so that we understand and agree on what that actually means. And the same goes for the guiding principles for open science. So sustainability, flexibility, collaboration, equality of opportunities, responsibility, respect, accountability, transparency, scrutiny, critique, and reproducibility. And of course, within the open science communities or the different communities, open communities, let's say, these things come naturally, but it was important to put them down and agree on them all together and define them in one place that will now, provide the standard for open science globally. We've also, there's also a series of actions for different actors, mainly governments, in 7 areas of action. So promoting a common understanding of open science, developing and enabling policy environment, investing in infrastructures and capacity building, fostering a culture of open science, and aligning incentives for open science, promoting innovative approaches at the different stages of scientific process, so not just at the output level, but also at the input level, and then promoting international and multi-stakeholder cooperation for open science. So each and every of these areas have a series of actions for member states and other stakeholders. And another thing which was important in the recommendation was to kind of agree on the monitoring process and how this monitoring process would go. Without going into details, what was important is that there is a monitoring process, and that monitoring process will have to combine quantitative and qualitative approaches. So I don't know if I still have like 1 or 2 minutes just to finish. The highlights, let's say, from this open science recommendation is really that it is the first international normative instrument on open science. And we would really, really appreciate, I think it would be a very good thing if this instrument can be used by various communities to leverage the work that they are already doing. So now finally, there is an international document that kind of backs the work that different communities have been doing, but also if we refer to it and speak in the same voice in terms of what the definition is, what the core values and guiding principles are, I think then we will be able to get those messages across to more people than we individually do throughout our networks. So core values and guiding principles are defined, the definition is there, and I think there is enough flexibility for everybody to kind of find their space and their place in the recommendation. The actions are there, and also this comprehensive open science monitoring framework. And basically what is very important for us is that hopefully in November, this is going to be adopted by the member states. We don't have any indication that member states would not be happy with it. Their experts already agreed to it. But we really want to start, from November on with the implementation and going back to the different communities to see what is the best way of implementing this recommendation and what is the best way of using it precisely for the different communities to advance in their work as much as possible. So I'm going to stop here and then we can address some questions and answers maybe later.
Yeah, thank you, Ana. Thanks. And up next is Osman, if he's ready. See if I can see him. Yeah, thanks, Osman. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Osman Aldirdiri. I'm from the University of Khartoum, Sudan. I work as a medical doctor as well as an early career researcher. And I've been working around the area of scholarly communications for the past 8 years. I'm going to speak today on another perspective, which is an African community-led digital archive called AfricArXiv. I'm sharing my slides now. So AfricArXiv is basically a community-led digital archive for African research. So it's a digital place for African researchers doing work in Africa or African researchers abroad or other people who carry research around African topics. And at AfricArXiv, we work towards building an African-owned open scholarly repository. So apart from just being a community-led digital archive, AfricArXiv works with African researchers on the ground trying to collect and bring together all the pieces of open science, making open science integrated, making open science more understandable for African researchers, as well as customizing certain things in that area. And we have around 10 principles at AfricArXiv that we work around. And one of them is making African research freely available. So we start by working with African researchers, giving them information on where to publish and how to publish. Also the kind of licenses they can choose and which one that best suits them. And on the other hand, we also work on areas like where do you publish, what kind of a repository, how to establish a journal, and things like that. We also work on areas like promoting open scholarship, open source, and open standard initiatives and policies. So we kind of promote these things, and we also ask other initiatives in the African continent to promote such things as well. We also respect like the diverse dynamics of knowledge generation and circulation, and we also give a special interest to things like diversity within the African continent itself and diversity when it comes to the knowledge generated and knowledge shared within our platform. We partner with a number of repositories to facilitate the sharing of preprints. These are a few of these. On the other hand, we also look into things like indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge, regional diversity. So we have a team of volunteers working with AfricArXiv, and all of them are volunteering their hours. So we also look into the kind of a representation, like having to look into things like Northern Africa, Southern Africa, East and West. We look into career stages, gender, and all of these balances. We also encourage publishing in local languages and publishing indigenous knowledge. So if you would like to publish a preprint on your own local language, you're free to do so. We also provide a translation for the whole website to certain local languages. And we also work to expand such things like peer review and collaborative feedback on certain local languages. We kind of work with other stakeholders to ensure that there is an equal participation for African researchers, either within the continent itself or abroad. So that's also one of our areas. These are a few pictures for the languages, local languages we provide translations for the website. These are the team members, the AfricArXiv team members. They come from diverse backgrounds within the African continent itself. And we also work with stakeholders to enable like the infrastructure, building the capacity for our own researchers in the continent, and how we can better like facilitate their work and how can we better support them. We try to keep in close contact and in open dialogues with other initiatives and other organizations around the world to make sure that the African continent and African researchers are all having their voice heard and getting up-to-date information around what's going on in the scholarly communication landscape. So these are some of the ideas we circulate at AfricArXiv around, which is, bridging the language barrier when it comes to publication, because at Africa, we have a lot of languages and many local languages. And if we only encourage publication at certain, well-spoken languages, then there's that language barrier, and we see it in many African countries. So by giving them the chance to publish in their own local languages, we're bridging that language barrier. We also provide a space for collaborations. So at AfricArXiv, we partner with a number of organizations. Some of them are within the African continent, others are outside. And we try to create some space for African researchers to work together on collaborative like preprints or collaborative researchers, or to give feedback and peer review to other African work. We also work on representation of African research on global platforms. We have seen during the past few years, also this has been reflected by the pandemic, that funding has been always dedicated and encouraged towards certain topics. And many of these topics were not of African, for example, African interest, or they're not a priority for many African countries. We try to represent more of their voices around areas like agriculture, economics, and things like that. So during the pandemic, we've also supported researchers to also publish things, not only COVID-19, but other things of local interest or within their scope of their countries. We also promote the use of African languages, as mentioned before, and the whole digital archive has been built and customized to fulfill the needs of African researchers. So we have a representation of African researchers within our own team. We also get in contact with African researchers to get to know how we can better support them, what type of materials they need, or if there is any barrier for them to publishing their work, and what is it that we can do with it. At the pandemic level, we started to have more African researchers getting interested to publish their work at preprint repositories. This is something that might not be seen at other regions, but during the past few years, we had so many pushbacks within the African research communities that many of them were not really trusting the preprint repositories, or they do not really encourage the extract of knowledge from these places. but after the pandemic, people started to trust preprint repositories even more and to look for accelerating knowledge or accelerating the publication as a vital element in science production. And we started to have so many researchers interested in publishing their work, but now we started to face another problem, which is how do you publish, what are the benefits, and the peer review element. So there has been some work done by a collaboration between AfricArXiv, TCC Africa, which is and IDER Africa, and there has been a series of workshops, like 3 workshops on best practices and innovative approaches to peer review. And this is customized for the African region. So scientists have been brought together to brainstorm, discuss, and get some outcomes on how should the peer review look like at the African continent. We had a strong collaboration with TCC Africa Training Center and the Training Center in Communication Africa, where a lot of materials has been presented to our African community, a lot of workshops. These are a few. There are also a list of webinars and workshops that have been done. One of the things that we might be shifting towards in the next few years, which is providing more training materials for the African community. Now people are getting more interested in preprints, the use of preprint repositories, or the establishing of their own institutional repositories. On the other hand, we started to see people moving from traveling or in-person trainings. So there are going to be more online trainings, more online materials produced, and there are tons of materials out there, but we have to customize them for the use of African researchers in many cases. Thank you very much for listening. Here are contact information, and we look forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks, Osman. And again, watch the Q&A and chat if there are any questions or chat responses. But Johanna is next, and my voice cracked when I said your name, but welcome, Joe.
You can also just call me Joe. Maybe that's easier. Thanks, Irina, for helping me with the slide share and presenter mode. Just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Johanna Havemann, based out of Berlin, Germany. I'm a trainer and consultant for open science communication, which is basically a fusion of open science practices and science communication practices, including scientific writing and presenting, and also how to research data management and research project management. Heavily informed by my work with John Tennant on the Open Science MOOC and other colleagues, many of which are also today here with us in the audience. So please feel free to chip in and write in the chat if you want to highlight some of our collective work. I'm also the co-founder of AfricArXiv. Thanks, Osman, also for presenting that. And with that, I'd like to jump to the second slide. And here are some of the communities, open science communities, that I've been in touch with or I've also contributed to, and had the pleasure of meeting friends and colleagues to develop content that is about open science in the respective realms. I've been working as a mentor with the Wikimedia German chapter Open Science Fellows Program, Open Ciders initiative by Sarah Gebali. Some of you know about Open Computational Inclusion and Digital Equity Resource. Juggle is a collaborative platform bringing open science enthusiasts and advocates together with innovators. And there's been a huge uptake of the platform facilitated through the pandemic. There's been a lot of collaboration going on. And in particular to address urgencies in combating the COVID-19 spread and finding solutions and collaborations around it. I would also like to highlight the Gathering for Open Science Hardware, which is one principle of open science, which is which I would say deserves more attention, as it's basically basically there's not as there can be more talk about the importance also of the hardware aspects in the research processes. And I'm also a member of the African chapter of GOSH, which is the AfricArXiv, which you also see here. And my personal work in engaging in all these communities for open science practices is, again, heavily informed through the Open Science MOOC, which I would like to jump in and introduce to you just now. So the Open Science MOOC, and MOOC stands, as many of you probably know, for Massively Open Online Courses, which is a concept to bring educational resources to as many users or knowledge consumers as possible. And the MOOC, Open Science MOOC, is also community based off. Today we're looking at, if you count all the Twitter and Slack channel members, it's like more than, I would say, well, probably about 2,000 community members of people who follow the MOOC. And the content of the Open Science MOOC is organized around 10 modules, which also represent the principles that we discuss here. Namely, Open Science Principles is basically an introductory module to explain where open science comes from, what it entails, what the underlying principles are, which were also mentioned here already, like collaboration, equity, transparency, and so on and so forth. And then it's more in-depth models based on each of these principles. What does it mean to collaborate openly for open science or for science in general, reproducible research and data analysis, open research data, open research software, and open source, which can also then include open source hardware. Yeah, just to name a few, and also, of course, public engagement, open educational resources, and open advocacy. So next slide, which is not so much of a difference, but if you look at the logo, so originally MOOC stands for Massively Open Online Course, but through the engagement in the Open Science MOOC and also the leadership by the founder John Tennant and the way we work together, we figured that MOOC might as well stay for Massively Open Online Community, because all the advocates and people in this community are and continue to and have been and continue to be also engaged in other communities, as we can also testify properly, all here in this round. Next slide, please. So the content of the module was already, so basically to develop educational content around the open science principles is a massive work, as was also pointed out by Anna. So the topic is cross-disciplinary, and also what it means to practice open science is region-specific as much as discipline-specific. So therefore, we approach this on a module basis, going through the contents, which you can all find on the Open Science on GitHub. And then module 1 and 5 and 2 for open access have been also initially been published on Eliademi, which was as much as can be open and freely accessible and easy to navigate platform, which unfortunately had to close down. We're currently also in the process of identifying other opportunities to make the contents readily available for users and researchers to seamlessly consume and learn from. Next slide. Also to ensure where it is possible dissemination, the contents are also co-published on Zenodo. And yeah, here's just a screenshot also of the Slack community with 1,256 current members, and there's ongoing discussions around the topics of open science, so the community is alive and thriving. And there's many collaborations that continue to exist and are new members joining as well to explore the depth of the topics. Next slide, please. So the community values that we identified and also outlined in module 1 were rotated again around diversity, inclusivity, fairness, equity, responsibility, ethics, accountability, and social behavior, which basically are the discussion points around what does it mean to practice open science, and how can we ensure that everybody around the world and can equally participate. Next slide, please. I'd like to at this stage honor, and I mentioned his name a few times, so much of the content that we put together was thanks to the efforts and activities and enthusiasm of John Tennant, who also tragically died in a motorbicycle accident last year. And he left a legacy, not only with the Open Science MOOC, but also a range of papers and preprints, one of which reflects again on the value proposition for open science. And so basically reinforcing what we also found now in the UNESCO Open Science recommendations, he also postulated that equal access to all outputs of scholarly research, including hardware, software, data, educational materials, and articles, is necessary to have timely responses to not only the pandemic, but any topic that is being addressed through research. Increased participation based on principles of inclusivity and diversity, and that will then enable a more rigorous, reproducible, and accountable research process. Next slide, please. So yeah, as Osman simply also introduced the AfricArXiv. So for us then, as an African focused community, we try to apply the learnings from the Open Science MOOC and also our own experiences to as the pandemic hit, to figure out how can we now make this knowledge available to write up recommendations of how open science infrastructures and resources can be harnessed for an efficient response to COVID-19 on an African scale. And yeah, basically, so the question now is how can we bring the global approach, or presumably global approach, down to the regional level? How can open science principles being put into practice with the urgency that the pandemic brought about, and how much of that is actually possible today already? Next slide. Yeah, and then coming back to what is now the future for the Open Science MOOC, the current steering committee put together recommendations like many other communities and presented them also to the team around Anna to contribute to the UNESCO Open Science recommendations, rotating again around the promotion of common understanding of open science, which now I think is beautifully reflected and also aligns with many of the principles and values that we share as AfricArXiv, namely also including and considering other knowledge systems like that of indigenous communities, and the urgency or the need for multilingualism, which is also expressed in the Helsinki Initiative, and yeah, and then to how to promote international cooperation on open science. And that's already happening in many instances, and it's exciting to be part of that and to see many initiatives thrive and discuss around these topics. The announcement in January was of the Open Science MOOC that there's about to happen a rebranding and enhancing the modules that I presented earlier towards also beyond these 10 modules, like what else can be entailed, also considering technology and how can in multilingualism and other aspects that have so far not been covered in the initial stages of the Open Science MOOC. And now the rebranding would go towards Open Science, Open Ed, game of words, to better describe what the MOOC entails. As it's basically an educational resource focused on open science practices, and also open for community input continuously. So I'd like to leave this with, or basically leave for our discussion the question: how can we establish and sustain a globally connected scholarly community to practice research transparently and collaboratively with a multilingual scholarly digital infrastructure? And also showing like 3 of the logos. I think we're like, through the experience with the pandemic, it's clear that we're not only with the pandemic, there's also other global challenges that we can only solve as a global science community or inform through open research. To inform other societal stakeholders, we need an open infrastructure that then enables these discussions to happen, and also the research workflow to be practiced and as collaboratively as possible as the digital infrastructure allows. And how can we then tackle multilingualism and allow knowledge flow across language barriers?
Thank you, Juliet. We have to get on to Arianna. Actually, we only have 8 minutes left. We're headed into overtime. So if you wanted to close with one statement.
And that is basically what I wanted to say. And I wanted to cut with that last statement, so it's perfect.
Okay, all right, thank you. So apologies for interrupting, but we have to move to Arianna, who's patiently waiting right now. So. And we're headed into overtime in case everyone has noticed, so please stay on as well.
Yes, please don't go. I promise I will be kind of concrete with my presentation. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Irina. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here to join this webinar today. And I would like to show our perspective from the AmeliCA and REDALIC initiatives in terms of our principles and how these principles are really driving us to build a community and also to implement daily actions in our services and in our model to really go or seek for the goal that is indicated in the principles. So, well, just very quickly, AmeliCA is a multi-institutional, community-driven initiative aimed to provide a cooperative, sustainable, protected, and non-commercial infrastructure for open knowledge. We started from the Global South, particularly from Latin America, but now we are working with all regions, and we're also working with all disciplines. The same happens with REDALIC, but REDALIC is a little bit, well, it started before. In fact, we started in 2003. And REDALIC, it's a platform for scholarly journals that are open access, that are non-APC, peer review, quality journals. These are our numbers. You can go to the web pages to see a little bit more of the initiatives. But today I would like to reflect on open principles, which is the aim of this session. So, well, in this case, AmeliCA implemented a set of open principles, but it's very important to highlight that our driving force is the science as a global public good approach. So everything that we do, even our principles, are around this approach. So we really believe that well, scientific knowledge that is funded with public funds should be a common global public good, and access to it is a universal right. And we also well, take care of different branches in terms of, well, open science and other aspects that we really believe that they are important in for open science to survive, to be sustained in the long term. So we believe, for example, that the research assessment system should evolve to give open access and open science a future or also a meaning. We also think that open access consolidation demands the transition to digital scientific communication, which is not happening in a strict sense. Financial investment in open access ought to be in line with the benefit for society, which is also undervalued, but the benefit it's really, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. We also believe on cooperative work schemes. We should leverage cooperativeness in order to make open science sustainable. Diversity of scientific journals is necessary, so hence the pressure to homogenize them ought to be stopped. Authors should retain copyright, and also science social impact is the foundation of open access existence. So we have, well, different principles. I'm not going into detail in each one, but I want to highlight that we are aimed to strengthening diamond open access to make sustainability and bibliodiversity the default in openness. We work only with organic open access. I mean, this is non-commercial open access, non-APC publishing. We also work with or for quality with peer review open access journals, and also we have different steps towards our better research assessment, very aligned with our declaration. So in this sense, both AmeliCA and REDALIC have built this model that provide different added value services to journal publishing in terms of journal production tools, quality certification, interoperability, and discoverability of scientific knowledge. Also, we provide services in terms of metrics and statistics to monitor what is happening in the communities, but also to see who is consuming certain kinds of contents and who is collaborating with, which are the invisible communities that are in the tissue or in the fabric of science. So these are our different services provided either by REDALIC or AmeliCA initiatives. I'm not going into detail, but I would like to highlight that during the COVID-19 pandemic, while lots of universities and libraries have been closed, along with their printed material and subscription-based resources. This is, for example, what happened in Mexico, that all the universities, along with the libraries, are closed now, are still closed. So millions of students have resorted to open contents to move forward with their education. Thousands of researchers have resorted to publish their research findings on the new coronavirus in non-APC open publications. So really this acquires a different or a more, in this context, open access really is a way to move forward with education and with knowledge sharing. During the COVID-19 pandemic in REDALIC and AmeliCA, 38,000 articles have been published from more than 70,000 authors from around the world in more than 1,000 non-APC open access quality journals. And what happened during the little bit more than a year is that more than 100 million article downloads have been articles that have been downloaded in our platforms. So we have really an increasing demand of our services because we provide the full text. And this is the real value of open science, to get all this scientific content to the community of researchers, of students, and society in general. We provide service to more than 60,000 users per day. So this is really something that has been increasing every day. Our servers are always very, very demanded. And we are also working now to group all this database on full text articles into different thematic collections. For example, we published last year the knowledge base on epidemics and COVID-19. And also we have different collections because we believe that we also have to work in the discoverability and help users to find what they are looking for. And I just like to reflect 1 minute on the evolution of openness and the importance and relevance of principles in this sense. So we are witnessing from our perspective that the evolution of openness from the global north that started with readership paywalls, and we want to transit to open access, but now the adoption of APCs and similar strategies like transformative agreements, big deals, and all these ways of consolidating commercial open access and different open science services are another paywall and another way of excluding developing countries and other regions. So we see that the evolution of openness, especially in the global north, it's moving from readership paywalls to authorship paywalls, with perpetuating this model of exclusion of other regions. And from the Latin America perspective, and this is the model that we have adopted in REDALIC and AmeliCA, and we wanted to extend to other regions and or to other publishing venues that can take advantage of this approach, is that there are no paywalls, neither for authors nor for readers. The publishing has been owned by the academic sector. It's university-run publishing and learned societies and other academic bodies. There is a distributed investment with a universal benefit for everyone, not only for the region, for the Latin American region. Platforms ecosystem there's a platforms ecosystem for quality assurance and visibility in this landscape. And we really believe this approach could be healthier in terms of providing organic open access, but also in terms of leverage open principles to really make principles and values the glue for building community. So we see these two approaches that are consolidating in different regions, and we really want to see the science as public good more widespread, more adopted, because we really believe that this approach really goes in favor of equity, multilingualism, epistemic justice, bibliodiversity. And just some final remarks. We believe that with this approach and these open principles, we can enable systemic participation in science. We can facilitate a global conversation from every region. It allows the academic community to take control on the course of action of scholarly communications and the future on that. Leverage the principles and values of the research community. And this is very important because the principles and values of this approach are the principles and values of the research community, which is sharing, which is disseminate as much as possible, which is collaborate. I mean, these are the core of the academic world. It allows the engagement of the academic community for the development and innovation of open science. And we also really believe that we should leverage technologies to achieve competitiveness and long-term sustainability. So I think in this sense that open principles is the glue to build this community together, to allow different institutions, universities, publishers to go for a mission. And this is what we are doing from these two initiatives. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arianna. I'm aware we're already a little over time, so if you need to leave, thank you for joining us so far. But we do have several questions that have been asked as we've gone through, so I'm going to try and take them in the order that they came in. Some came through chat and some were in the Q&A. So the first question came in for Ana, which was talking about, are we moving from citizen science to community science? And sort of agreeing that where they work, we're using community science and it's more inclusive. So would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, just very briefly, thanks for the question. And I think Irina actually put inside the chat let's say the definition, which is there in the recommendation. Community science, participatory science, citizen science, actually all of these kind of initiatives, let's say, are mentioned in the document, particularly to say, you know, maybe in one part of the world we use citizen science, in other parts we're talking about community science or participatory science. There were also some people who were saying, you know, sometimes people who do science are not necessarily citizens. So there is also a kind of a rights-based discussion there as well. So we've kind of tried in the recommendation to put together all of these different notions under this broader heading of engagement with other societal actors as well.
Thank you. We also have another question for you, which was how can open science practitioners from various agencies get involved in the UNESCO open science effort to help move it forward?
So that's the best question. I love this question. And there is like 1,000 different ways. You can always come to us, just, you know, send me an email and we can talk about it. We will be, of course, doing a broad mobilization and engagement with different actors, but of course we will not be able to reach everybody. What we will also do is to help the countries. So once the recommendation is adopted, depending on the country, what happens is that some countries actually establish their own community of practice for the implementation. So it's really at the country level where the most important actions actually in the end have to take place. And some countries will do these committees or platforms for engagement, etc. For others, maybe we can put you in touch with the people, either from the ministry or from the UNESCO National Commission. So there are all kinds of different ways of getting engaged, and we are hoping that we will be able to, you know, channel all the goodwill of the different actors from different agencies to get involved. And particularly also, I think that's why I kept talking about the monitoring, because the monitoring is important and reporting back to UNESCO is important. So we have to also develop a type of a reporting system that allows also for different agencies to report back to us and to say, in line with the recommendation, these are the actions that we have taken, and they have actually contributed to the implementation of the recommendation. So lots of different ways to engage, and please do. And you know, we are hoping also in September we're going to have a meeting with our Open Science Partnership, where precisely we want to ask them, how do you want to engage? What do you want to do? What are the actions that you would like to undertake? How do we bring all of this together? What type of platforms would be needed also for us, amongst us, to exchange on information? So putting all this in place and really hoping that everybody will be able to join. Thanks for the question again.
There's one more for you, Ana, which is, I'll copy it into the chat as well. It's just, what are some crucial documents upon which the recommendations were built? Was there a role for initiatives like DORA and Hong Kong principles?
Yeah, actually, the DORA principles are in a way taken into account in the recommendation, and we've really received all kinds of different documents from all kinds of different communities. And again, you can find all the inputs that we have received as inputs into the recommendation online. We've tried to be as transparent as possible. So the results of all the surveys are there, the documents, the written inputs from everybody is there. The article that Johanna Havemann also presented, we have it also on our website. So anything that came in is there, and we really tried as much as possible to incorporate everything into the recommendation. Of course, not everything got there, word by word, but I think the main lines were really there to cover for everything, and in particular the DORA principles, San Francisco Declaration, and all that is quite prominent in the recommendation.
Great, thank you, Anna. We've got a few questions for Osman now. I'll just copy again them in the chat. There are a couple of questions around disciplinary differences. How do you handle these in AfricArXiv? Is it an umbrella for different components, or an all-encompassing project? And is there a way to distinguish content? So did you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So basically what we do at AfricArXiv is that we allow researchers to choose between our different research like partner repositories. So when a researcher submits their work, they go to submit it at the AfricArXiv website, and then they choose like Zenodo, Open Science Framework, or Science Open, or others. And from there, they add the labels so we can distinguish these like the agriculture from the medicine, the biology, and others. So that's to answer the first question.
Great. The second one you may have read already is in the Q&A. It's about where is AfricArXiv really? As mentioned, the infrastructure and its operation and ownership are a vital part of the open science agenda, and then goes on to talking about LibSense and whether there's a possibility to join that up. Would you like to address that? I can see Joe is typing an answer as well, so something may appear from Joe in the chat. Oh, have we lost Osman? Joe, did you want to step in maybe and answer verbally?
Sure, thanks very much. Yeah, we're very much aware of LibSense, of course, and also contribute to the discussions. And so the primary urgency for AfricArXiv and our existence is to make African research output discoverable as soon as possible. And the infrastructures or some infrastructure is already readily available. So we want to encourage African scholars to use these freely accessible, free of charge accessible infrastructures that ensure highest possible discoverability on a global scale. As much as we also from our launch in 2018 postulated that we want to help to establish a Pan-African, African-owned, decentrally organized African digital scholarly infrastructure in collaboration with other stakeholders, one of which is LibSense, and then there's also the African Open Science Platform. There's many stakeholders on the ground in various parts of the continent. It's a huge continent, as we're all aware of. So there's much work to be done. So basically this explains why we're, yes, working with Western existing infrastructure to enable and ensure discoverability today, as much as possible and as much as feasible. At the same time, of course, there's a huge question around ownership and who owns research data in particular, and especially towards the narrative of decolonizing academia, not only for Africa, but also other global South regions, and also the way research is being done in certain parts of the world. This is also topics we are heavily engaged with and would love to collaborate on with many stakeholders. And yeah, the discussion but yeah, we fully agree that eventually we're also working towards ensuring that knowledge can also be regionally hosted and owned. As that's currently not feasible, we want to ensure discoverability first and work towards ownership of the data and the repositories as well.
Great, thank you, Joe, for stepping in. We've got a question for you, actually, which is about the Open Science MOOC. Is OS MOOC still fundamentally a training education structure with modules and courses or direct activities, or more of a less structured community with more open multi-directional dialogue? I think you did answer this in the chat, but maybe good to answer verbally as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have many Open Science MOOC members also here. I think it's both. So primarily the idea is to develop educational content for researchers, primarily to have easy access to how to implement open science principles. That was is still the core mission, and this is also why I mentioned there's currently a rebranding going on. But as that collaboration and bringing these contents together as open educational resources, there's also many opportunities for collaboration to engage in all kinds of open science initiatives and practices.
Yeah, and Chris pointed to a couple of blog posts on the OS MOOC to follow up. I think we've had one final question that's come in on the Q&A, which is just addressed to all of you, I think. So if anybody wants to take this one. After the pandemic, young researchers will need more help to access information in any field. Does any institution already have a plan to support emerging researchers in the post-pandemic world? So as anybody on the call could answer that if you have a plan.
May I? Yes. Well, in our case, we have different working collaborations in terms of supporting young researchers and students and graduate students. In this sense, for example, last year we organized the essay contest on open science. And we also provide different training and webinars to really help students and young researchers to discriminate what is quality content and how they can leverage open access content and how to use platforms as Redalic.
Great, thank you. I'm conscious of time. Chris, am I handing over to you to wrap up?
We went over, so
just a little.
If there are any follow-up questions too, like I figure we can probably go for another, hopefully, right, our speakers, thanks for sticking around, but maybe another 5-10 minutes if there's one last question or two.
I wonder if while we're doing that, if somebody could share that slide with some of the upcoming events, just to remind people about some things that are coming up as soon as next week.
It's there. Did we have any additional questions, Helen? Maybe maybe we're finished, right?
I haven't seen any come in unless I missed some. If anybody wants to remind me, but I think that's it.
I think we answered all the questions.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for joining us today, and hope to see you at further discussions. And thanks a lot for your active participation, and thanks a million to all the speakers.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.